Did the Falcons actually tip their hand that they're definitely going defense in round one this year?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me each and every day as everydayers, meaning that you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, of course, today we are wrapping up the end of this illustrious Combine week with Jarvis Davis, head guru over at Locked On Sports Atlanta. I was trying to come up with an appropriate title for you, Jarvis, but
distinguished.
Wow. And so we'll talk about sort of what Jarvis's biggest takeaway so far at the Combine. Given that Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris have spoken to a lot of media outlets and various topics have been discussed, but we'll also talk about why, one of those topics isn't Kirk Cousins being granted permission to be traded, as well as some players that, have been granted said permission from other teams. And if Jarvis is interested in that, and of course, it is Combine week. This is the day we're recording this Thursday afternoon, right before the D-line and linebackers hit the field. And we'll, of course, talk about which players Jarvis has his eye on, as so many of these guys have decided to be cowards and not work out today. But, I just get so upset, Jarvis. Like, this is a media event. Like, what do we do? But we'll get into that later. But Jarvis, welcome to the show. But what is your biggest takeaway from the Combine so far, at least with the Falcons? Is it Terry still saying, hey, Kirk, we're comfortable being the backup? Their thoughts on Kyle Pitts, Drew Dahlman, Michael Penix being QB1 emphatically, the Falcons only interviewing defensive players, or something else? What is it that you're sort of taking away from this week of like, that's interesting?
I think the interesting piece, and it kind of ties back into last year, because last year, the TJ Yates was the only assistant that came to the Combine last year, and then they end up taking Michael Penix Jr. Like, okay, all right, okay, whatever. And now that you have nothing but the defensive assistants coming to the Combine, offensive assistants, like, they just chilling, right? They just taking the week off. Like, y'all chill back here at Flowery Branch, and we'll go handle all this up here at the Combine. And then they interview nothing but, they have 45 interviews, all of them. Every last one of them are of defensive players. And they say they talked to several Georgia players too. And, Malachi Stark saying, yeah, man, I'm talking to the Falcons on Friday. Ooh. So, yeah, that's interesting to me, because I have been pounding the table for so long for them to draft a defensive player in the first round. A guy that's going to be a generational player, in my humble opinion, and Jalen Carter. They passed on him.
Mm-hmm.
They may have picked a guy who's going to be a generational player as well on the other side of the football. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But there are some guys I feel that they had passed on under Terry Fontenot's regime. I feel like it could have been game changers for this particular team as a whole. And when you think about this year, this offseason being the most important offseason from a decision-making standpoint, from this front office, from Terry Fontenot, I feel like that is very interesting that he would have, or Raheem Morris would agree to have nothing but his defensive assistants up there and having nothing but conversations with guys on the defensive side of the football. I just feel like that is very interesting, and I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest one. All the other stuff is just kind of talk. And it's just like it's hard to read into that. And we talked about this on Locked On Sports Atlanta earlier
Posturing. I
today.
call it posturing.
Yeah, and with Terry Fontenot and how Terry says a lot and really doesn't say anything, and so you just kind of like you put Terry Fontenot's interviews on as background noise, basically, because it's like occasionally you'll hear, again, that's no slight at Terry, but occasionally you'll hear something like what was that Terry said? Like rewind that or whatever. But for the most part, you're not really locked in. Now Raheem, on the other hand, he'll say some things from time to time where you'll be like, what was that? What did you mean by that, Raheem? Like last year, for example, when he talked about, we got to find a quarterback for our city. And as you point out, Jarvis, a lot of people speculated at the time that was Justin Fields, but it wound up being Michael Penix. And so these are some of the things, and I think that nugget that you bring up about TJ Yates is a very interesting nugget. So as it is still February, we still firmly believe that the Falcons, because it's February and hope springs eternal, and we haven't gotten to March where the Falcons will do a thing that will be like, why are they doing this? But because we're still can be so optimistic and positive in February, we firmly believe that they will definitely be taking a defensive player in the first round, whether that's a front seven player, a back seven player, we will have to sort of see. But, one thing that did not emerge this week, Jarvis, because I saw a lot of news with a lot of teams being like, with GMs and coaches saying, yeah, this guy, we're open to trading this guy. This guy now has permission to seek a trade. And I find it curious that the Falcons have not come out yet to say that about Kirk Cousins. And so let's talk about that a little bit more and what that means as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. And even if you miss the opening tip-off or you're just waiting for that fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same game parlay, such as, over-under for points, rebounds, assists, steals, all that and more for your favorite Atlanta Hawks or whatever team you support. Is Trae Young going to shoot the lights out? Is Dyson Daniels going to get in his hands into the cookies jar? Whatever you want, FanDuel has it all. And all you got to do is sign up at FanDuel.com, and new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So as I said, Jarvis, a lot of teams out there, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the guys that are apparently on the trade market and trading block. And if any of those guys interest you in Atlanta, but I just find it curious that the Falcons have not done the same with Kirk Cousins, right? And, they as we said, they've said this week that they're comfortable with Kirk Cousins being the backup quarterback. That was something that Terry Fontenot said back in January. We've talked many times since then saying that's what Terry has to say in order to negotiate a trade. Mm-hmm. I've noticed the Falcons have been, when people have asked them about whether or not Kirk Cousins is going to be the backup when we get to September, they have done the thing that they often do, as a lot of teams do, which is like, well, things will change if, things, it's a lot of if statements where we'll see how it goes, but we are currently right now, right? It's that old adage when it comes to GMs and coach speak, where it's like right now, he's a member of the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see what happens later on. And so that seems to be their attitude towards Kirk Cousins. But yet you would assume with that in mind that they would be like, hey, Kirk, since you have a no trade clause, it's really up to you whether or not you get traded. So the more time you give Kirk Cousins to go seek that trade, you would think that would be the case. So I'm just curious for you, Jarvis, as you see all these half dozen or more players being given that permission to trade. Falcons haven't done that with Kirk. Doesn't mean they won't do it in the future, but what is your interpretation of that?
I feel like they understand that Mike McCartney and Kirk Cousins are very smart people. They've been able to make a lot of money together. They've been a great combination. They've been married together. They've been married for so long, and they've made so much money. So it would behoove them not to seek a trade right now, because the ideal situation for them is for the Falcons to cut them. And they have their own negotiating, and they can talk to whoever they want to talk to, and they don't need any permission to talk to said team that are interested in Kirk Cousins' services. And I think that I know that we said that Terry Fontenot doesn't say anything, but he does have themes. The theme for this offseason is that we're going to do what's best for the Falcons.
I heard that.
And I heard that several times, right? And I know you heard it too. So for the Falcons to give them permission to seek a trade, they ain't gonna benefit them at all. At all. Oh, yeah, we'll offer you a 9th round pick for Kirk. All right, y'all cool? Yeah, Mike, you cool with that? Yeah, man, let's do it. Kirk, yeah, man, I'm cool. Hey, Terry, 9th round pick, you straight with that? You know what I'm saying? Like, so no, that's not gonna benefit the Falcons. That's not in the Falcons' best interest to trade for a 9th round pick. Obviously, there's no 9th round pick for all you serious people out there. I know y'all out there. Yeah, I be lurking. I know y'all be checking out, watching, listening, judging, all that good stuff. But I think this is the scenario that is, I think both sides are going to say what they need to say, right? We talked about Terry saying what he needs to say, and Mike McCartney, they got a no trade clause. So, hey, man, y'all do what y'all need to do, because I think that they are really putting this in the Falcons' court, and I think that ball, they're going to have to just kind of move on, take the ball and go home when it comes to Kirk Cousins ultimately. But I feel like they're going to play hard balls for as long as they can until they start engaging. But I don't see a scenario where they say, hey, y'all go find a trade, because no trade that they get in those conversations is going to benefit the Falcons. And I think Terry is not interested in anything that's not going to benefit them at this point.
That's fair. I figured it's just like, you got to you got to do the song and dance, like,
right. Yeah.
It's like, hey, Kirk, go, because I remember the Raiders doing this a couple of years ago with Derek Carr. It's like, hey, Derek, go and find a trade. And everybody knew that Derek Carr wasn't going to waive his no trade clause, and there was a deadline where they needed to cut him to avoid guarantees. Eerily similar to the Falcons' current situation. But you know
what a lot of times happen in those situations? I feel like they end up cutting those guys because no trade, when they come back to the team with those offers, like I said, it's not going to benefit them. So I feel a lot of times the teams that say, hey, go see if you can find a trade, whatever, go find your value, all that good, whatever that crap is. So I feel like that's just an indication of the team saying, you know what? We know more like we're going to have to cut you, but hey, if somebody's willing to come on in, let's go. And I don't think that Terry thinks that they're in that situation. So that's why Kirk is not out there like that. But a lot of times those guys end up getting cut anyway, because they already understand that they don't benefit from their services no longer, right? Or the number's too high, or they want a new contract and they know they don't want to pay them for a fact. And other teams know that. So yeah, they're going to just throw something up against the wall and see if it sticks. And a lot of time it doesn't. And the player ends up walking in anyway.
Yeah. And speaking of that, there are a couple of players that are been given that permission elsewhere to seek a trade. And I'm just curious, Jarvis, looking at this list, and I'm probably forgetting a couple of names, but looking at this list, are there any guys that you think, hey, Perry, while you're, in between phone calls, talking about Kirk, maybe you make a couple of phone calls about some of these players and players that have been given that permission over the last couple of days, guys like Jair Alexander, the Packers cornerback, defensive tackles Devon Godchaux from the Patriots and Jonathan Allen from the Commanders, wide receivers Cooper Kupp from the Rams, and Deebo Samuel from the 49ers. The Rams are also shopping Jonah Jackson, who they paid a lot of money for, the guard, and the Titans, Harold Landry, who was a player that, there was rumors with the Falcons being interested at last year's trade deadline, and whatnot. So is there any name that jumps out to you that you're like, I'm intrigued, at least pick up the phone and have a couple of conversations with some other NFL GMs?
Offensive players are automatically off the list. So no to all the offensive players, right? So let's go to Jair Alexander. I'm intrigued. I'm interested, but he wants another contract. But hey man, I'm all in for, rent a player, because essentially that's what the Falcons did with can't even think of the man's name. Oh,
Talking
what
about
is his
Matthew
name?
Judon?
Matthew Judon. Yes. Oh my gosh. He's already gone in my mind, I guess. You get a player who's playing for a contract. So, hey, contract year in the NFL, dog, like you get production most of the time. That wasn't the case for Judon. But if you can do that with a cornerback, hey, man, I'm all for it, man. Sign me up, dog. Like, if you can figure out a way to get Jair Alexander in here and pair him off with AJ Terrell, what you talking about? A lot of problems solved? Yes, and Jair can take the ball away too, So I think that if you add a guy like that, that would be very, very interesting for this defense because you will have a lot of flexibility, if you are able to have guys like that on your edge of your defense. You can get really creative as far as affecting the quarterback, if I can use a brick term.
Yeah. I think Alexander is probably the most intriguing of this list. I think the
Sure.
big knock on Jair has been the injuries and the durability these last couple of years. That's I
Sure.
think a big reason why the Packers are sort of moving on from him. But you have that connection with Jerry Gray. Justin Hood, I think, is the Falcons DB's coach as well. That comes from that Green Bay team, so very familiar with the player there. That's probably the one that seems to me like, you can check off that cornerback box and get go get Jair Alexander, rent a player for a year or two, maybe draft a guy, maybe that pushes it back where you can wait maybe a little bit on drafting that guy early in the draft and have that guy sort of waiting in the wings to replace Jair Alexander a couple of years down the road. Like that's an intriguing scenario to me. So I certainly think of these names listed, that's probably the one that I would probably be most willing to make the phone call about.
Yeah, man, I'm with. Yeah, so for me though, I'm intrigued by Harold Landry, but why he can't stick on one team? Like, why everybody he ends up in the trade? We want to move on. I'm just like, dog, what's going on, Harold? Mr. Landry, you put up some decent numbers, like, from what I've seen, you can get after it a little bit, but good gracious of life, man, this man can't stick nowhere. Like, what is it? What's going on, man? But yeah, but I think that obviously having a guy like that would be very intriguing for me. Harold Landry. I'm not interested in Jonathan Allen as much as he was a monster coming out of Alabama. Oh my, I was lusting for Jonathan Allen when he first came out of Alabama, but now, given his age and where he is in his career, I'm not interested in bringing in another guy that's close to that 30 mark, right? And because the Falcons got like two of them already, they got to make decisions on and because we had conversations about Grady earlier, on Locked On Sports Atlanta Football Party. So yeah, I'm not interested in bringing in another guy like that.
Yeah, I hear that. I feel like if Jonathan Allen was cut, you could get him on like a cheap sort of prove it deal. I would be like, okay, like like he's probably not a guy that you could trust to play a full season, but like the 8 games that you get of Jonathan Allen and Grady Jarrett, working together, like I'm intrigued by that. But but you got to pay
that way.
So I'm just like, it'll be interesting. But
I hear you, dog. I'm not trading for him though.
I'm not going to trade for him. But I'm just like, if he happens to become loose and he's like, I'll go to Atlanta for $5 million on a 1-year deal. Again, I don't think he's going to take a contract like that. But like again, it's February.
Man, it's February. We happy, man. It's nothing to be mad about in February.
Under those very specific circumstances, I'd be a lot more
April. Yeah.
But we will see if the Falcons move Kirk Cousins or make these phone calls for some of these trades. But let's wrap up today's Locked On Falcons talking about the players of the week, which is those guys working out at the combine, and which sort of front 7 players Jarvis has his eyes on later this afternoon on Thursday when those guys hit the field. At least a handful of those guys that hit the field. More on that later, as well as if there's anybody out there at another defensive position that he's intrigued to see those guys work out in the underwear Olympics as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So, Jarvis, I want to ask you, which D linemen and linebackers are going to be working out Thursday afternoon that you're intrigued and interested to see, what some of these numbers that we're all going to be sitting here going gaga, loving the 40 and the broad jumps and the 3 cones and the bench presses and all that stuff and more. But first, I got to name off all the guys, at least so far, that I've seen that are saying, like, nah, I'm going to wait till my pro day, right? Mike Green, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Mikael Williams, Jalen Walker, Abdul Carter, Jack Sawyer. Right? It feels like, at least among the edge rushers, James Pierce Jr. and Shamar
I don't
Stewart.
want to see Jack Sawyer. I was watching film on him earlier. I don't want to see Jack Sawyer. But go ahead, continue.
Okay. It feels like James Pierce Jr. and Shamar Stewart are the only, at least, guys projected to be taken in round 1 that aren't cowards, that aren't deciding to not work out. No, I'm joking, guys. I'm joking.
Oh, so intense.
I did this 4 or 5 years ago with Chase Young. I was like, he's a coward, and then I just the meme continued for like the next.
I'm a coward. Where you looked at that camera like it was me, bro.
But a lot of these guys have injury issues that are lingering from the season and whatnot, so it's understandable that they want to put their best foot forward. And pro day numbers usually are a little bit better, although this track in Indianapolis got a fast track because they've been blazing times these last couple of years.
Yeah.
So, who do you have your eye on this afternoon that you're very intrigued to see these guys work out in their underwear?
I mean, I'm interested.
Yes, I had to slip that in. Yes,
really, bro. See, I knew at some point this show was going to get weird, and it got weird right there. Like, who are you excited to see work out in their underwear? I need you to slow down when you say that. You know what I'm saying? At least pause a little bit. Throw that in there. You ain't got to do the camera on pause, but you know what I'm saying? Just, which seems so random at times when you said it.
If you were paying attention, if you were locked in,
I'm locked in, baby. Like, I'm ready, man. I'm coming up with answer in my head. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm gonna go here. And then you just like, you decided to see you anyway. Anyway, but let me ask you a question. To answer your question, where I am with the edge players, Jalen Walker disappoints me. Like, I'm sorry, Mikael Walker disappointed me because I really wanted to see where he was just from an athletic standpoint. I mean, I know I got a good idea where he is. I want to just go out there and show it and prove it, right? And be the guy that can be drafted in the top half of the draft. So that's kind of frustrating a little bit. But some lower name guys that I have my eye on, David Walker out of Central Arkansas. I really like this dude. I like what I see on film. I like what I saw down in the Senior Bowl. I feel this can be a cat that can come in, and if you get drafted in the mid rounds, cool. Falcons got some mid round picks, or they need to get some more, and needs to get one more because I feel like this cat might do well enough to get into that third round conversation. But just from a production standpoint, he stuck at Central Arkansas for 3 years. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't transfer. Like, I'm a little bit of old school, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm real big on kind of figuring out where you are, man. Because when adversity comes as a football player, it's going to come, right? So if you're doing that, I'll never forget, man. When I was at Albany State, I think it was my redshirt sophomore year. I had a little issue with some playing time. You know what I'm saying? I was rotation, all that stuff. Back in the early 2000s, they talking about rotation. I don't want no rotation. I want to play. I'm going to start. I'm the starter, but I want to play the whole game. You know what I'm saying? I ain't trying to come out. Anyway, so, I had some issues. So I was having some sidebar conversations with, a couple of little school, up here in Atlanta, back home, you know what I'm saying? AU Center, I just keep it at that. It was Morehouse, for those who wanted. Anyway, so, but like the one thing that really stood out to me, and I really took it with me for the rest of my life, I had a conversation with my mom because I had come back from break, come home for break, and she was like, "Where you going?" And I was getting ready to go meet up with the coach at said school in, AU Center. Because I'm very intrigued by AU Center, as you can see. I visited there when I was.
I've been there once or twice. Yeah.
It's very, very pleasant when you go down there. But so having a conversation with mom, I ended up going to I was going through putting some stuff together so I was getting ready to go meet the coach, because the coach was like, hey man, I want to talk to you, see what's going on. I got a full ride for you, ooh, all that stuff. So she was like, where you going? I was like, I'm going down to, say you. She's like, why? I want to meet with coach because, he wanted to talk to me about coming to the school. She's like, what you mean? I was like, yeah, I'm going to go talk about the school. Like, oh yeah, I have some issues. She's like, what? So she was like, son, sit down. Mom starts off a conversation by saying, she's like, son, if you run from your problems, you're going to be running for the rest of your life. I was like, oh, that cut a little bit. That hit me, what I'm saying? Right here, right in my little chest right there. So, and I said all that to say, like, those are some of the things that I value, right? Like, that was probably the best decision that I ever made, because as soon as I came back from break, I had a conversation, a man-on-man conversation with my head coach, who was also my defensive coordinator, and I still respect him to this day, have a great relationship with him, and he respected me a lot by having that face-to-face conversation and telling me exactly what my issues were and where I thought I should be, and he ended up agreeing with me. So I was able to work the whole playing time situation out, and the rest is history. But yeah, man, I appreciate guys that stick and stay, especially in today's world of NIL. So, and I feel like David Walker is a guy that I'm very intrigued by, and I would love for the Falcons to bring in a guy like that.
Yeah, I've watched a little bit of film. David Walker, obviously, saw a lot of him at the Senior Bowl. I've liked a lot of what I've seen so far, and so I do think sort of seeing him measure up athletically with some of these other guys that are being touted as first and second round picks, while he's sort of stuck in the third, fourth round. Like, is he as good an athlete as some of these guys? I think makes a ton of sense. Just looking at a couple of the measurements, Nick Scorton, a guy that was supposed to be at the Senior Bowl but pulled out. Watching his film, he was listed at like 280, and I was like, man, this guy's game is much more of a 260-pound guy. And then sort of seeing him measure in at under 260 at 257, I'm like, okay, that's I like that number for Nick Scorton, the Texas A&M edge rusher. So I'm very intrigued to see what he can run at and how he moves at a weight that I feel like is better fit for his sort of more finesse playing style, where he's using all these various pass rush moves and whatnot. So he's another guy that I'm intrigued by. Is there any other edge rushers or D linemen or linebackers that you're interested in, Jarvis? And of course, I got to ask you the question that I probably already know the answer to. Are there anybody, later this weekend that you're going to keep your eye on in these DBs and offensive players and all that stuff and more?
All right, so I'll start with the linebackers. There are two guys that I'm really intrigued by. One of them is a local kid, Barrett Carter. I think he could be something in the league, right? And not necessarily for the top end of the draft, obviously maybe mid-round, depending on how he runs. If he runs, go out there and run that 4.4, he might fly up to that second round potentially, And another guy I've had my eye on since Senior Bowl is Jeffrey Bossa, the linebacker. He was a safety turn linebacker out of Oregon. Man, he was built like a doggone machine. So he's definitely has caught my eye. But, as far as later on in the weekend, for me, only offensive player that I would care about and not raise all sand and hell about if they were to draft is an offensive tackle. I feel like a guy like Carson Vincent, tackle out of Alabama A&M. I had a chance to have a conversation with him after Senior Bowl practice. I get that he has that in him. I mean, of course, he's a little raw, right? He had some good days down there at Senior Bowl. And he had some days where cats, specifically in the game against Landon Jackson. Landon Jackson out there, woof, that's another little edge guy I want to keep my eye on too, but yeah, I feel like bringing in a guy that's not necessarily a high-end talent, but has a lot of potential, can be a solid starter for you, at a good price, which the Falcons need to find a lot of in this particular draft. yeah, Carson Vincent might be a guy you might need to take a look at, and because he doesn't have to start right away, all things considering, they don't do anything crazy with Jake or Caleb McGarrett, which they can, but I don't see that happening at all. So, but yeah, Carson Vincent is definitely the guy that I got my eye on.
Yeah, I believe the offensive linemen are working out on Sunday, so certainly a way to kind of book in the weekend. Start off with the trench guys, end with the trench guys. That's the way the combine does it. But sandwich in between, probably the one I'm intrigued by is I just kind of want to see how fast Arian Smith is. Can he, get in that sub 4.3 40? I just love guys run fast.
Happens.
It's
going to happen. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the fast 40 is going to happen, and somebody's going to draft him. People are like, he drops all about. I'm like, man, do you understand how scouts fall in love with?
I can teach you how to catch a football. I can't teach you how to run a 4.2.
Yeah, exactly. You can't teach speed, dude. If you got out there running a sub 4.3, man, we will send that card in. We will write your name on it and send that card in. And we'll get you some screens and all that stuff to get you warmed up. And, if you got to warm up to the game, yeah, man, we'll figure out a way, because that you can't teach that, man. And scouts will forever lust after guys with that type of speed. So, it's funny to see it every year, but it ain't nothing changing. Ain't nothing changing no time soon. Sorry.
Yes. He can scoop, as they say. He can scoop.
Yes,
so we'll see what all these various players do on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the Combine. We'll see what, the Falcons give Mike McCartney that chance to make some phone calls to some teams or whatever, and the Falcons make some phone calls for some teams. But, after this Combine is over, we're like 10 days, basically the sprint to free agency or whatever it is.
Yeah, man.
So, we're almost in March, and now again, February is all about the fantasy, Jarvis. It's like, oh well, we could do this and we could do that, and then March is like the rubber hits the road, and you gotta go out there and make some moves.
It gets real. Like, hey, you got to get under this salary cap, sir. Yeah. It's not $8 billion anymore. It's $5 billion.
Yeah.
Still over.
Yeah,
still over.
We'll see what moves the Falcons are making. We'll see what free agents, if any, they bring in. We'll see what trades and all that stuff. It's going to be a busy 2 weeks. And so continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta to get more insight into the Falcons' upcoming moves. And, of course, check out Locked On NFL Draft if you want to get the lowdown on who's making money and who's losing it this weekend at the Indianapolis Scouting Combine. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.